Are you up for a little storytelling? We've got two charismatic bar operators willing to share up their pandemic stories, future predictions, and what they think about real estate and government assistance. I introduce to you Michael Neff, master bartender and proprietor of Cottonmouth Club in Houston, Texas, and Frizell, owner of Fort Defiance in Brooklyn. Michael has 25 years experience and counting in the bar and cocktail game, touching almost every level of the business, from creation and ideation through execution and promotion. He has also written extensively about bars, bartending, spirits, and cocktails, and has been featured in publications as diverse as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, GQ, and Esquire Korea, as well as his own former column in Serious Eats. Sinjin is an award-winning writer, bartender, co-founder of Gage & Tallner, the landmark chop house in downtown Brooklyn, and the owner of Fort Defiance, the critically acclaimed cafe bar in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Frizell's writing on food, travel, and cocktails has appeared in many publications, including Bon Appetit, Sauveur, Imbibe Punch, Gourmet.com, Fine Cooking, and Oxford American. Paul, I'll let you take it away with this session. Bar Operator Stories.
All right, so thanks for that great introduction. We are back here on Bar Virtual. And as a reminder, you guys, of course, can hit the extra tab there if you're on a mobile device or over on your web browser to actually chat with us live during these sessions. And that's the best way to kind of get some feedback going. And of course, as we continue our coverage here with Bar Virtual, the whole concept behind this is to really get operator stories that are kind of giving us the real street level what's happening. And that's what we're doing here today with this session with our bar operator stories. With me today, I've got Michael J. Neff, who is the master bartender and proprietor there of the Cottonmouth Club in Houston, Texas. And also joining me is Sinjin Frizell, who's the owner of Fort Defiance out of Brooklyn. Both of you, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah. All right, so Sinjin, let's start with you a little bit. Let's kind of get your story, a little bit about how you guys got going. This is kind of I think will be the new campfire of the future of what was happening for you when COVID struck. So kind of tell us your story of how your bar got hit.
So I have two places. One is Fort Defiance down in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is the one I'd like to speak about mostly today.
Yeah.
But I have another place called Gage and Tallner, and it's a 140-year-old chop house, an interior landmark on Fulton Street in downtown Brooklyn. It had been closed for 15 years. My partners and I put it back together as a 3-year-long project. It's an absolutely incredible, beautiful space, 2 levels, private dining rooms, separate cocktail bar, brass chandeliers, the whole thing. And our official opening date was March 15th.
Oh,
so
lovely.
Not a great day to open a restaurant, guys. Not great. So that place is just in a deep freeze right now, and we'll just leave that one alone because it's really not interesting to talk about. We were going to open it, and we ended up, firing the whole staff on the day that we were supposed to open to the public instead of the other way around. That's fine. The other place is a more interesting story. It's a 40-seat cocktail bar / neighborhood restaurant in Red Hook called Fort Defiance, which we closed in late March. And I kind of, without really trying to, gradually converted it to a grocery store over the last 6 months. And that's a story I'll be happy to tell. But that's where I am now, is that my bar is now like a little gourmet grocery store. Just open to the public so people can come in and shop this week.
That's very interesting. We've had a few companies and operator chefs, et cetera. Abe Conlon out of Chicago, Fat Rice, one of the top restaurants in that area, did the same thing. He flipped over to a gourmet grocery store and completely shut down his restaurant during all this. So interesting choice. Michael, let's get into your story a little bit about what happened at the Cottonmouth Club, how you guys got hit there in Houston.
Well, I mean, Texas is different, so we were a little bit behind what the rest of the country did. We kind of did see it coming, and we're just waiting for the day when we shut down. In the early days, we thought it would be for an extremely long time. We thought we'd be closed down up to 15 days, maybe even 20. Obviously, in retrospect, that seems very naive. But the first thing that we decided to do, because bars couldn't be open, was, I still had my staff around me, and we're bartenders, and we wanted to find a way we could still support ourselves by, putting out a tip jar and doing stuff for our clientele. And we also wanted to do something knowing that the people who would come into the bar still had some kind of connection to places that they wanted to go and to be around people and to be around us and our place. So we started what we call a virtual bar. And, in the very beginning, it was literally just firing up a camera just like this. And, we did all kinds of crazy stuff. But, it's become kind of a staple. And we've been doing it now every night at 9 p.m. Central until since March 22nd, I think. And it's anything, it started out more kind of like a variety show. We just tried to distill down the essence of what bartenders get tipped for. Besides the drinks that we serve. We knew we couldn't serve drinks. So we wanted to find a way to keep people connected, not just with us, but with each other. And I think at least in that sense, it was, we've definitely learned a lot about the power of an online community as opposed to a community in a bar.
Well, I think both of you kind of did what you could to, that's interesting too, because you're doing something that's still staying connected to the community, which is so paramount in today's bar business. I mean, to stay relevant, people where they can recognize what's happening. In your case, Michael, with the virtual, I think that was brilliant. And obviously, St. John with the grocery store, I think that still keeps people at least knowing what's happening there at Defiance. So let's get into some of the stories of how operators were actually dealing with kind of the economic side of this, because this is something that I think too often here in the industry, first of all, we don't have enough association understanding of really what's happening in the bar industry right now in terms of the economic impact. And I want to kind of drill down into that with both of you. Let's start with real estate, because that's usually one of the big controllables in a bar. It's probably one of your top line expenses. Michael, let's jump over with you and kind of talk a little bit about how did you deal with your landlords in terms of negotiation? What kind of was the story there for you?
I mean, in the early days, it was interesting because, I think of it in two phases. The first phase was when the entire country shut down. Right. And then something happened depending on what state you're in, and then it was kind of just us. It was mostly bars. Yep. Sometimes other industries. Other industries were limited, but at least in Texas and in a lot of other states, bars were mandated to be closed. The first days with my landlord were interesting because, the first time I saw him after the formal shutdown, we kind of looked at each other and he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, I don't know. It's what are you going to do? Because, at that point we really realized that, it was a symbiotic relationship. We have negotiated something that we can both live with, at least for a short period of time. I don't pay nothing, but I don't pay my full rent. He's very cognizant of the fact that I don't have revenue and haven't really since March. But the problem is and this is something that every single business that still survives right now is going to have to face, is even in the event that my landlord is the coolest landlord in the world and says, wait, you don't have to worry about any kind of rent until all this is over, whatever over means. Right. It's not a gift. It's just debt. Every single thing that we've been given to help us get through this is debt. So, if I can pay 50%, 75% rent, it doesn't get rid of that 25%, even though my landlord he's been a blessing. I got to tell you, he's been very patient and, we're still here and it's a testament to the relationship we now have. However, there's no, he's not giving me stuff. Right. I still owe him money. And this is true whether it's, some other vendor I haven't paid, whether it's even government assistance to the extent that any of us got it. Most of that is in the form of debt. So as we look forward, not to the next 2 or 3 months, if we look to the next 2 or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, businesses that are opening or that are open right now are looking at, very, very low, if any, profitability for, could be the rest of the life of the business. So you'll have many, many people looking at it saying like, I could survive, but it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I want to dive into that a little bit further. St. John, your real estate story there in Brooklyn. Brooklyn has been a huge hot spot for some of the coolest bars and restaurants in the world kind of popping up. So real estate has been on the fly there. How did you guys deal with your situation?
Well, it was kind of a unique situation because my landlord and I were in the middle of this kind of long-term lease negotiation. We've been open for 11 years, so our first 10 years lease had just expired, and he raised the rent and gave me a lease I couldn't sign for various reasons. Just it was not favorable to us. So we were sort of negotiating this in slow motion when the pandemic hit. So I found myself in a weird position. Typically, if you're outside of a lease as a tenant, you're vulnerable. But here, it was almost the other way around. Now the landlord was vulnerable to me just walking away from our non-lease. I wouldn't owe him anything were I to do that. Whereas if you are in a lease, in New York at least, you're typically liable for to pay out the term of the lease or a portion of it. So it put me in a weirdly advantageous position that I didn't really even have to use. I proposed to him right after the businesses got shut down. I said, hey, how about I pay you 50% in April? And he immediately got back, yes, that's fine. I've been paying him 50% ever since then. There's been no further communication. So it's kind of worked out fine.
Well, you guys have stories at least that are decently good. I mean, we've seen and heard some really horror stories of landlords that have, really started to put the pumps down on a lot of bar operators, which is, and kind of what you said there, Michael, is this is one sector of the industry, especially in hospitality, that feels almost as though it's been singled out. And I think a lot of operators kind of are in that position. I want to talk to you guys about, because both of you had mentioned in some of our research around the conflict, inner conflicts that you have of trying to save a business, but inner conflicts of also trying to keep everyone safe at the same time. And it kind of puts a lot of pressure, I think, on operators and will continue to put a lot of pressure on operators, especially as states open up. Here in Florida, our governor just opened up the bars and restaurants at 100% capacity. Your thoughts on what happens to your own representative communities when we get 100% back in Houston, 100% back in Brooklyn? How would you guys deal with that today if it were to occur? Just jump in, either one of you. Michael, you want to start?
Yeah. I wouldn't, at this point, we won't open until we feel it's safe. It doesn't matter what the governor says or the mayor says or anybody else.
Yeah.
There has been no good communication anywhere that I can see in the entire country. And now I'm connected with bar owners and people who work in bars in all 50 states. Because we're not involved in the solution, it feels like everything's kind of been an experiment, and it's been an experiment on us. So
for sure.
You can say, if you want to go to a restaurant or a bar because you've been on lockdown, you can say about yourself, I'm okay with the risk. That has zero bearing on if the person who has to go back to work because their landlord's going to kick them out is okay with that same risk. And the risk is larger. It's larger for us because, it's time and exposure, and we're around people the most time. The first time that they tried to do that to us, we tried to be as safe as possible. And the fact was that it wasn't just us. Unless everyone was as safe as could be done, then you still have people that can get infected. And one of my 3 bartenders in that period of time got tested positive and got sick. And we were meticulous about everything that we did. So the fact is, we cannot be safe enough for an entire city. We can't be safe enough for an entire community. So I, as a business owner, have to look at it in terms of how much is my business worth and how many lives potentially is it worth? And at this point, if one person's grandmother will die as a result of me having to open the doors, then I won't open the doors. If that means my business fails, then my business fails. It's not worth one person's mom, one person's kid, one person's grandmother. Certainly not one person who works here, nor one person who comes here. It's just not. I don't see anything has changed between how people act and how mandates are being enforced between now and last May. And until such time as we either have a vaccine or some kind of, general sense in the scientific community that this is more handled, we won't open unless we can at least have some kind of idea that the state itself has our best interest in mind. Because it is right now, all they want to do is say, hey, you guys are open. And I see that in Florida. DeSantis wants to say, hey, the bars are open, but I don't see anything that he's doing to actually force them to be safe.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, we could be in a very precarious situation. And one thing he did make a mention of is that he wasn't going to go backwards. So this is what, at least I've talked to operators just since Friday when the ruling came down, bar operators right here in Miami Beach, that are, just like you guys. I mean, these guys are just on the edge of failure. And they know if they don't get these doors open, it's a problem. But they also know that if they open these doors, it could be a huge problem, especially in the way that Florida's kind of recommending. St. John, with you in Brooklyn, obviously New York took some pretty drastic measures early on. And, to a certain extent, were considered kind of the poster child. There's been some questions about that. But how did it, from a business community standpoint, if de Blasio and those guys start to say, hey, we're just going to open them back up, Brooklyn's wide open, what would be your stance at this point?
Well, that's very difficult to imagine. I mean, they've been extremely cautious. There's been a big movement among business owners to a coalition of restaurant owners actually sued the city to sort of force their hand with this, to begin the gradual reopening of restaurants. Right. And I know there's a lot of pressure on the governor and the mayor now to open restaurants up all the way, especially as, the temperature drops and outdoor seating becomes less of an option. I think it's irresponsible. I'm not one of the restaurant owners who's, pushing to have that happen. I know that a lot of people's livelihoods are on the line here and the life of a business is on the line. But if you put people without masks on who have COVID-19 in an enclosed space like a restaurant, they are going to communicate that disease to the people sitting around them. That's just how it works. And I don't have a solution to this. I think the 50% seating is good. It's at least a good start. It's something we can try and we can monitor and see what happens. But like I wrote in a story I wrote for Bloomberg, it's like your restaurant or your bar is failing. It's not your fault. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. It's because there's a pandemic on in the world, and it's making it very hard for people to congregate in the ways that we usually do. So it's difficult. No one's saying this is easy.
No,
Right.
For sure. I want to get into a couple more topics here. I know we're running a little short on time, but I do want to ask you guys this question, and that is, when you look at the bar business going forward, you guys are veterans, you're experts in your field, you understand kind of the dynamics and the cost structures, the elements of being able to open a business, make it successful, all those kind of things. The tables have completely changed. Michael, let's start with you. If you were to open another bar business post-pandemic, how would you go about it? What would be kind of the process? Would you go the route of virtual or create an entirely new infrastructure from a real estate standpoint of how you might open a bar?
I mean, from a real estate standpoint, the people who are opening bars right now are actually in a pretty advantageous position because, first of all, I mean, not to be a vulture about it, but a bunch of places have closed and they're perfectly good bars and they're perfectly well set up and they just didn't have enough money to, like St. John said, deal with a totally unexpected circumstance, which is a pandemic that really just zeroed in on bars as a cause. So, I'm not leaving the business, so I will have other bars or certainly be involved in them. I think, once everything kind of equalizes, and that might take up to 2 years till we figure out as a society, like, what is our role with each other? Are we still allowed to shake hands? Like, are we still allowed to hug each other? Can we still dance? Once all that happens, we'll still need bars in America. I mean, people don't really think of the service we provide in communities, in the cultural life of a city for sure, and in microeconomies around the neighborhoods in which we are. So, I mean, we'll definitely be needed. So someone is still going to have to at least table this idea. Everyone right now says, to-go drinks are the future. Drinking at home is the future. That is a bleak future that nobody wants. So once we all kind of get the idea that it's okay to go out again, whenever that is, we'll still be here and we'll be needed. I think for me, I have learned more about how to integrate this kind of space into an actual space. And I found different ways to augment an actual bar. That's very exciting to me. So we will definitely involve more of that digital programming into the bars we actually have, which is ironic. If you knew me 6 months ago, I would have been the absolute opposite.
Absolute opposite.
It's not a replacement for a real bar, but I think it can be a good augment. I think, shifts like what St. John's doing are, I think, definitely additive to what there are definite bars kind of like Dead Rabbit in New York that have some grocery element to it, but the more I think that we can layer in other things to serve our people and serve our communities, and I think the better. So I think we will walk out of this probably more diverse in every way you can imagine than we did walking in.
Yeah. Which I think, in a way that is, if there is a silver lining to this whole issue in the industry, because we saw it in the restaurant industry, a lot of operators have now really focused in on curbside and virtual kitchens and all those kind of things, which was essentially an evolving product anyway. Right. The bar business was quite a bit different. We did not see any of those kind of advancements from a technology standpoint moving in that direction. St. John, if you were to build a bar tomorrow there in New York, would you look at a complete new remodel of how people would be spaced? What would be kind of some of the things you might do to kind of prepare for this down the road?
Well, I wouldn't open a bar tomorrow, to be honest. I would open a bar in a couple years. Okay. I think, like Michael said, I think we thought this was going to last, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And here we are 6 months later. I think it's going to be another year at least before people start getting back to a normal lifestyle. I mean, I hope. So what I would do if someone was forcing me to open a bar is I would find a great space that's going out of business, get into a lease negotiation with the landlord, just beat the living hell out of them, get a build out period of 18 months or something rent free. And then, and then get into open it in the future. When hopefully things have, gone back to semi-normal. Bars aren't going away. Michael's right. People need to come together, and they prefer these, cozy spaces where they can bump up against one another. There's something to all that. We're not doing that right now. And really don't plan on people doing that for another year or 18 months. But after that, I think, the last time we dealt with a pandemic like this was 100 years ago. Hopefully it'll be another 100 years before we have to deal with this again.
God, I hope so. All right, so let's last question here, and that is going on the economic front. Both of you kind of mentioned this in some of our research prior to this segment, is when you look at the bar industry, there isn't enough support for both bar and restaurant industry to really kind of make a case for the economic impact that this has caused upon the industry. If you look at whether it's labor, real estate impact, which we still don't know what that's going to be probably for another year, the number of brands that have been lost, restaurants, et cetera. If you could go build a dream team economically to be able to convince government, city, state, municipality level organizations to help this industry, what would you guys try to do there in terms of an economic case of trying to make it for the industry? Michael?
Well, I just think about all the other industries that have been, bailed out by the government in my lifetime. And it's like, and multiple times, like how many times we have to save the airline industry? I mean, it's like, it feels like it's every 5 years, not to mention, the banking industry, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
When we went through Hurricane Sandy in 2012, we hardly got any money from the government at all. And it became apparent that, the government wasn't here to save us. That's why when the pandemic happened, I just assumed we weren't going to get any help and just sort of went into action just under the assumption that nothing was coming. We ended up getting the PPP loan and the EIDL, which is great, which is the only reason that we're still operating. But I really think the Restaurants Act of 2020 is huge and could make a huge impact on the industry if it was passed. It is up to the politicians if they care about people that work in the restaurant industry or not. It's as simple as that as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Michael, how about you?
I mean, between bars and restaurants, we're the second biggest private employer in the United States. There are millions and millions of people who work in this business. There are multiple more millions of people who make their living off of that industry. So as St. John said, looking at that idea of bailouts across different industries that kind of prop up Wall Street and then compare it to something like hospitality, so bars and restaurants, which really kind of feeds these microeconomies. They feed cities.
Right.
Your city is defined. Miami is defined by its nightlife to a certain extent. New York City, by all means. Houston, for sure. Even little towns. And these are kitchen table issues for so many people, and they're very, very unwilling to pass the smallest legislation really just to help us. So I don't really expect a bailout because honestly, everything that we've done, everything that we've been giving to help us, and this is different state by state, but everything we've been given is basically the government saying, here's a tool, however small, for you to earn your way out of this mess. And also, like Sinjin just said, it's not our mess. We didn't make it. It wasn't based on bad things that we did. So if I had to make that case, I am in the process of a couple things. One, working with a group called Thirst Group, and Thirst Group is one of the biggest kind of volunteer organizations that's working to compel insurance companies to do their part in this pandemic. Because at this point, they've done zero. They've honored no legitimate claims, and they're fighting as hard as they can to delay that as long as possible. So there are some really great people in this business who are kind of banding together to make that happen. The other thing is I would have, I'm making a very, very specific case about the economic, cultural, and social impact bars have on cities and communities. Every single time I lay out that case, the person I'm talking to says, oh, I'd never really thought of it that way. People think of bars like they see them in movies. They think about them as, sloppy drunks throwing wild punches at each other, and that's just not what we do. And without us, your small communities suffer substantially, and that's something that I would get an actual economist to say, let's study it, let's look at it, and let's present that case both to the public and to whoever the policymakers are to say this is something that needs to be saved, and it needs to be, and it's because we still need to have new bans, we still need to have places for people to go, and we still need to have New York City being a city that people want to go visit for a specific reason, much of which is because of its bars.
Yeah, for sure. Michael and Sinjin, thanks so much for stopping in today. Great to hear your operator stories, and I wish you guys both the best of luck.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you guys stay tuned right here for more great coverage here on Bar Virtual, and don't forget you can always hit the chat bells and really kind of dive into each of these sessions to get some feedback from our speakers and our experts. So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you soon right here on Bar Virtual.